Hi, I'm Alicia Harlov.
I'm Lisa Aegis Gilbert.
I'm Catherine Christensen.
And I'm Becky Bond. And welcome to the Hoof to Horse podcast, where we dive into important discussions on horse care, welfare, and bettering the equine life. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Hoof to Horse podcast. In this episode, we're tackling the topic of laminitis. But specifically, we're going to be giving you our perspective on some potentially controversial laminitis hot takes. So before we really start things off, because I will read to you guys some hot takes as we go through and you can react to them. But I think that it's important for us to first define what is laminitis and what's the difference between laminitis and founder.
Yeah, you know what's funny is that not to jump right in, but somebody asked me this for a podcast that I was on, and I was like, oh yeah, well, some people say that laminitis is inflammation of the lamina, but we actually know that the inflammation comes later and it's like elongation of the lamina. And the person was like, whoa, back up. What is lamina? And I was like, oh yeah, like not everybody knows what lamina is. And we're just diving right into like the nitty gritty. So I feel like a child being like, well, there's a coffin bone in the hoof. There's a bone in the hoof and it's connected to the hoof wall by these little zipper-like tissue that, there's one side of that zipper is, basically coming off of the coffin bone and it's just connecting to the hoof wall. And when
the bit
that
coming off the coffin bone, it's not bone.
Yeah. Right.
It's like a
It's soft tissue.
Yeah.
Yes. So that soft tissue zipper is what is basically holding that hoof capsule together to the coffin bone internally, and the coffin bone is suspended in there with that lamina. And when that becomes elongated or damaged or weakened, and that's where we get a whole host of other issues. Yeah, and I guess, we talked about laminitis versus founder, and it sounds like where you guys are in Australia that this is, founder isn't a term that's used as often. I feel like founder is almost overused in the States. I don't know if you feel that, Becky, where,
Yes.
Every horse that's sore, they're like, oh, they've foundered, or like, oh, this horse is foundering. And really, in my education, founder was used for cases where there's actually rotation, whether that's rotation where the wall and the coffin bone are no longer aligned, where they're not parallel with each other anymore, which we, typically call as hoof capsule rotation, or whether the horse has a phalangeal rotation where the long pastern bone, the short pastern bone, and the coffin bone are no longer aligned. And the coffin bone looks like it's pointing down more towards the ground, which that would be the phalangeal rotation. So that would be those cases that we reserve using the term foundered for, whereas laminitis can just be cases of that like inflammation of the lamina or damage to the lamina that's painful, but you don't have that alignment issue yet, and hopefully don't end up with it.
Yeah.
I think a good way to think of it, or the way I've always thought of it, is that not all laminitis is founder, but all founder is laminitis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. I think in my education, we use terms like subclinical laminitis, where a vet there's still inflammation going on in the lamina and in the foot, but a vet is not necessarily going to diagnose that horse with laminitis, and they're the most frustrating cases to work with. And then there is laminitis, where there is sinking or rotation or, all the rest of it. So I think subclinical laminitis is horses with thin soles and possibly even sinking that might not be picked up on, is what would you agree, Kat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of how we term our terminology in our part of the world. Well, when I'm explaining to owners, that makes it easy for them, because what I say is there's inflammation throughout the body, and if it's in a soft tissue, inflammation is what is inflammation? It is excessive interstitial fluid in an area, right? So usually if it's under the skin, the skin can just move. If it's in soft tissue, encased in soft tissue, the tissues move. But in the hoof, it's got a rigid shell, and it's like when you get something, when you hit your thumb or fingernail underneath your fingernail, it hurts because it's got nowhere to go. So that's why laminitis is so painful. It's because there's systemic inflammation going on, but the inflammation has nowhere to go in the hoof. But
Like casting, like it's holding the foot
yeah, so
tight.
that's how I explain it to owners. But on an actual technical level, like we know that we thought it was glucose, and then they did a study where they gave ponies glucose.
Oh, fructans. I think fructans.
Okay, yeah. So Katie Asplin did a study, yeah? Or she did too. So where they did, the control group got, I think it was saline, and the other group got glucose or whatever it was, the sugars of some description. And then obviously the test group founded, and they were all euthanized, and they were looked at, and like their hooves were looked at very closely. Then they did the exact same study again, but all they did was give them insulin, like hyperinsulinemia, like heaps and heaps of insulin. So the control group didn't founder, and the insulin group did founder. So it's about the insulin in particular. And I have read some other studies that are like trying to talk about the actual mechanism of action on a biochemical level, but I think we still don't know exactly what's going on with that.
Yeah.
I think that's because there's more than like, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I was wrong. The fructan study was with Professor Pollitt, and
Yes.
he tubed inulin in the horses to see if that induced laminitis. I think maybe it induced laminitis, but only at so much that it caused a SIRS response, like endotoxemia, like colitis.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a metabolic response. It didn't affect the insulin levels.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I was referencing a different study, so I hope I wasn't confusing you.
Cool, cool.
Why don't we put both of those studies in the show notes?
Show notes. Yeah.
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 I think
got
the key thing is that laminitis actually isn't just one cause, which we know. And what it really means is that there's been some sort of cellular damage or death to the lamina that weakens the laminar connection. So basically, on the cellular level, the cells are no longer healthy and they're dying. So in cases of inflammation, there's not enough circulation to the hoof, there's not enough oxygen, the cells die because there's not enough oxygen. In cases of, if you have an acute inflammatory response, that inflammation in the hoof is also restricting circulation. That's why you get that really strong bounding pulse, right? So again, you're restricting oxygen to the lamina, it's dying. I have also read things about metabolic disease and the impact that metabolic disease has on the production of what we call reactive oxygen species or free radicals, which are, for anyone who doesn't know, they're what's responsible for the aging process. They're responsible for modifications to DNA and lipids and the cellular membranes that are detrimental and lead to disease. So if you have high circulating levels of free radicals, they can react with your cells and cause cellular death and damage and DNA death and damage. And we know that in metabolic horses, those reactive oxygen species are elevated. Yeah. So I think laminitis is more than one thing, but the key thing is that the soft tissue inside the hoof is dying essentially and not able to do its job.
Yeah, which is caused outside of the hoof, not in the hoof necessarily.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's such a key thing.
Sorry, Alicia.
I'm so sorry. No, I was just going to say, I think it's important. What you guys are saying is that we know that laminitis is a symptom. It's not a disease in itself. And so there's a systemic issue that's resulting in this hoof issue. So you have to tackle the systemic issue to resolve the hoof issue.
Yeah. There's no use treating just what's going on in the hoof if you don't take away what's causing it. It's like trying to treat an asthma attack by just breathing deeper. It's not gonna help.
Right. And actually that was our first hot take on my list was laminitis is not a hoof disease. The hoof is just where the damage shows up.
Yeah.
And that's so true. So I think at least in the training that I've received about treating laminitis, some of it is trimming and remediation in the hoof, but a lot of it is figuring out what the root cause is and treating the root cause. Because if you don't take the trigger out, the horse is just going to be in a perpetual state of systemic illness, essentially.
Yep. And we see that, I think we see that a lot as professional hoof care providers. And that's the kind of thing that causes us to become, have compassion fatigue and really struggle. year in and year out when these poor horses are so incredibly sore, and it's the same thing again, year in, year out.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's also why it's so frustrating that a lot of times the burden of resolution in these cases is placed on the hoof care provider because it's not necessarily what we do to the feet. Obviously, what we do to the feet can help with comfort, but that won't reconnect a healthy lamina connection. It's
Yeah.
not going to resolve the cause of the laminitis.
We only have such a small time that we're interacting and impacting on these horses' lives. It's not like they're living at our houses for the most part, that we can actually have an effect on them all day, every day.
Yeah.
We're not in that much control, and yeah, it can get very frustrating.
I
Yeah.
think just to add to that, I was thinking along the same lines, Kat, is that while we are professional hoof care providers, we're not the only hoof care providers on that horse's team. The main hoof care provider, the one caring for the hooves, is the owner or the daily caretaker of that horse, has the biggest influence over whether that horse is going to rehab and recover or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I might go through this list and maybe I'll ask one of you at a time some things. That way it's easier. So, because I think we're all very passionate about this topic. So it will help us maybe not talk over each other. Obviously, if after somebody answers, you guys want to hop in and give your take too, that's fine. But like maybe I'll start with Kat for the first one, and then I'll do Alicia and then Lisa, because that's where you are on my screen.
Sounds
No
good.
pressure.
All right, so I'll start with Kat, and I'm just gonna start at the top of the list, and you can react however you want and give me your opinion. So our first hot take is diet doesn't cause laminitis, metabolic dysfunction does. What are your thoughts?
Well, I struggle with that because I think all horses should be on a low sugar diet. And there's got to be a good reason to change the diet from being low sugar. Like if you wanted to add other stuff in, they need to be in a considerable amount of work, or like an older horse that's not holding weight or something like that. So therefore, if a horse is on the low sugar diet, they shouldn't be getting issues. But if they are, then definitely it's metabolic. But if they're already on a high sugar diet, then I don't agree. I think there's definitely sometimes that we can cause laminitis in horses from what we feed them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to let people know too that when we talk about a high sugar and starch diet, we're talking about diets that are above 10%. Typically, ESC, ethanol soluble carbohydrates plus starch. Some people also use NSC. That's a whole nother podcast talking about that. But generally, we're talking about on the whole, when you include forage and whatever concentrate the horse is getting, anything below 10% of that ESC plus starch would be considered safe in general. And I think actually, Alicia also, I learned from Alicia that we need to be paying attention to the starch levels too. And, more than 4% starch is also, even if you're below that 10% or at that 10%, if the starch is 4%, you still might be affecting horses that are sensitive.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you for that information, Alicia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's one horse that I worked on that foundered on a feed that was 10%. It was 5% sugar and 5% starch. And when I actually reached out on the ECIR forum, they said they had a handful of horses that foundered, that became very painful, laminitic, re-rotated on that same feed, even though they had retested it and it was what the label said. But their guess on the ECIR forum was just that like even 1% higher of the starch was just too much for some sensitive horses.
Yeah.
Do you know if that has to do with the insulin response that starch causes, or is it more related to the changes it makes to the microbiome? I would love to know. You might not know the answer to that, but I was curious if they had mentioned that to you.
So what I always heard, and this might not be correct, I don't know. I mean, it could be the microbiome, but I always heard that it was because the starch converts 100% to glucose in the body, whereas the ethanol soluble carbs only convert at, I don't even know if it's like 60 to 75% to glucose in the body. So the starch has a higher insulin response than the same amount of ethanol soluble carbs. But I do wonder, I mean, there's so much we don't know even about the microbiome that it could be that.
Yeah, definitely.
And very quickly before we move on, I just want to add, we're talking about the diet. This is anything that enters the horse's mouth.
Yeah. Grass.
Treats, sugar, grass. Even if you think, oh, there's not much grass out there,
If there
there's
wasn't a horse
grass.
in there, how much would be in there?
How much would be? They're getting their head underneath the fence. They're eating little stretched blades of grass. Any treats that your neighbor is throwing over the fence, the whole bit.
Yes. All right. So I have the next hot take I'll address to Alicia. It's kind of two in one. So it's two different thoughts that are opposed to each other. The first thought is laminitis horses don't necessarily need shoes. But the second thought, which is opposed to that, is that barefoot only rehab isn't suitable for laminitis recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with both of those statements. So I don't think I've ever worked on a laminitis case where I didn't use hoof protection. Because I think ethically we have the, you know, it's our duty to make sure these horses are comfortable and not just like stumbling around super painful while they're recovering. And I've seen boots with pads help so much in just taking, you know, taking some inflammation out of their hooves. I do think, the trim plays a huge role in how we can help distribute their weight bearing on their hooves and then using that padding so that they have some cushioning. But I will also say I have I mean, I don't do metal shoes, so I've never used metal shoes in 10 years of rehab cases. I have, I think I can definitely count on one hand. I'm trying to think if it's even been more than twice where I've used glue-on shoes. But I do tend to like to do a shorter cycle where I can work on the hooves maybe every 2 to 3 weeks in a laminitis case, an active laminitis case, until the root cause is found and removed and the horse becomes more comfortable. So if they're in a glue-on setup, it doesn't really make sense for me to put on glue-on shoes to take them off 2 weeks later. So having the boots and pads where they have that comfort, and they're moving around within their own range of motion and comfort level, is a best of both worlds to me because then I can take the boots off, work on the hooves, look at them. I mean, I have horses here that live at my house that have come to me laminitic, and I was able to look at their hooves once a week and make little tweaks or adjustments. And I just wouldn't have been able to do that in a shoeing setup. And of course, I know that there are amazing hoof care providers that do shoeing setups. I don't think, in my experience, that it's been like necessary for horses that I've worked on to become comfortable, as long as they have, like you're saying, not just shoved out to fend for themselves barefoot. They have some sort of protection to help with that.
Would
I don't know
you
if anybody else has thoughts.
would you be more inclined to use the boots and pads during the acute phase and then move on to a longer cycle hoof protection option?
Yeah, actually, I have done that. Sorry, I should have clarified. You're right. During the acute phase where they're actively painful is when I use the boots and pads so I can really monitor their feet. And sometimes, you have to deal with abscesses and things like that as they're recovering,
Yes.
that I want to make sure I can have access to the hooves. But I do have one horse at my house that had past acute laminitis, has been okay now, but she just has so much coffin bone remodeling that I do have her in glue-on shoes, and she's super happy in that.
Yeah.
She's just loving life that way. So once, they're past the acute phase, some of them I think do like having that more permanent protection.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
I tend to use, sometimes boots and pads are great, but your owners have got to be really good at changing boots, checking boots, keeping the feet dry, depending on the environment, etc. And I don't always have that option. So I have tended to use like a lot of like squish pads and Nanrix and that sort of thing, elastoplast it on. So instead of gluing them
Oh,
on,
yeah.
we can elastoplast them on so that we can still change them every week and have a look at the feet and that sort of thing. So that's worked really well for me.
Yeah.
I've just
Is that
used
like
my first.
Elasticon or
Yeah.
casting? Elasticon. Okay,
Elastic.
yeah,
Yeah. So generally, yeah, Elasticon for the first, like, I don't know, 6 weeks when they're really sore and we're changing all the time. Once they start moving a bit more, then we chuck some casting over the top of the Elasticon so that it lasts better.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
awesome.
great idea.
Yeah.
All right. This one's for Lisa. I think you're gonna like this one, Lisa. Horses with laminitis don't need a long stretched laminar wedge toe.
Yes. Okay. So I agree with that statement. It is a very contentious statement at this point in time. There is, for anyone who's even remotely involved in hooves and social media at the moment, there is a huge furor going on about a certain laminitis trimming protocol that preserves the toe and the stretch lamina, the laminar wedge, sometimes to an extreme, where the balance around the center of rotation is something like 10, 15%,
15%, yeah.
15% like heel to 85% toe. And in my educated opinion, that's wrong. I'm very strongly against that. Now, there is the opposite effect where people are chopping toes off and making horses even more sore, right, in laminitis rehab. And that is a mistake too. You've got to preserve something for the horse to stand on and or provide something for the horse to stand on. Like even in a boot, if you are chopping that toe right off and you're destabilizing, the hoof wall so much that the pedal bone and the inflammation inside is like the hoof capsule is not at least partially doing its job of protecting the inside of the hoof. Even with the boots and pads or glue-ons or whatever, like that horse is going to be painful. So there's something like whenever you see one of these extreme examples of this is the only right way to go and look how extreme this is, but they grow it out and it's all good in the end. And then the opposite end where no, you have to chop it all off and have nothing there and all the rest of it. What actually works for most horses is somewhere in the middle, right? So the reason why I don't like leaving a longer toe on any horse, I'm actually quite notorious for cutting for cutting toes off, for chopping toes off, right? But I do it in such a way that maintains the sole callus. And this school of thought of the long toe says that a toe callus is a pathological development in a hoof, but in my experience, it's not. In my experience, and probably everybody else's experience, a nice healthy toe callus, which is hard to define on a healthy foot unless you know what you're looking for. It's an area that's directly in front of the projection of the tip of the pedal bone. It is denser sole, and it is meant to share some weight and be a weight-bearing platform, okay? Or we call them the toe pillars.
I'm just going to add into that
Please.
comes from the research of Bob Bowker, and we could
Yes.
probably link that study in the show notes as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So preserving the important parts to protect the pedal bone on healthy and laminitic horses and getting rid of the excess is only going to reduce the leverage we're not only caring about the leverage on the hoof wall. We're caring about the leverage on all the bones and
The
soft
rest of the
tissue
limb.
all the way up the limb, right? And this is not an emergency trimming protocol that's for 6 weeks, for instance, where you're like, this isn't perfect, but it's keeping the horse comfortable, so we'll just do this for now and then change things as things get better. This is a protocol that people are using for 12 months or more. What is a 15 to 85% heel to toe balance going to do to a horse over the course of 6 to 12 months? Like,
Way that a horse has to compensate the way it moves in order to be able to move it's just crazy, and it's not fair ethically.
it's not fair. It's the compensations. It's not what's directly happening to the hoof, it's the compensations. You need to step back and look at the whole horse. It's not
Yeah.
just focusing on the hoof. Anyway,
And I think like I'll totally stick my neck out there a little bit and you know, this is such a like you're saying, it's such like a controversial thing right now, which is kind of crazy when we think about the anatomy and the actual biomechanics and physiology of it. But I've seen so many radiographs now where toes have been left longer. And I don't know if you guys have the same assessment that I have, but I have seen soles thin in progression of these radiographs where like over time you can see yeah the lamina connection is growing and tighter. I think that's why a lot of these radiographs are shown, but I'm more focused on the distal portion of the coffin bone and the thickness of the sole, which I see getting worse.
yeah.
And Kat mentioned Dr. Bowker. I spoke with him, I've spoken with him a few times, but I think it was like 2020, 2019. And he and I were talking about long toes. I think anybody who's listened to Dr. Bowker knows that he does not like long toes. And one thing that he mentioned is, the solar corium that produces the sole material, it's going to produce the same sole material no matter if you have a long toe or a short toe. And if you have a long toe, it's not producing more sole to make up that extra length. It's
Okay.
producing the
Yeah,
same amount of
okay.
sole for a longer area. And so now that sole has to thin to make up that difference in area. And
Yep.
so his main point in this whole discussion was like, if you leave long toes, you are thinning your horse's soles.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my goodness. Like I heard that. I was like, oh, and now I'm
Click.
not saying to go and like trim all your toes way back, especially if you have thin soles, because that can make a horse very sore. It has to be like a careful, progression where you're making a calculated decision on how far back to bring these toes and how much to do to keep the horse comfortable. But I have noticed as I've gotten horses in a better, that ratio around the center of rotation where we have a closer to like 50% of the foot ahead of that center of rotation and 50% behind, I have noticed that we have typically better concavity, better sole depth. And it could just be the hoof is getting healthier. I don't want to just like, correlation is not causation, but
Yeah.
um, I just want to toss that out there. And I know, we can probably get some flack on this, but I don't know if you guys have seen the same.
I would like
I've
to see venograms of these
Yeah.
big, long, crazy toes over
Hmm.
time.
The other thing I always wonder about when I see this, because it's not just the long toe, there is like a strong piece of this that's also the messaging is like you should also take the heels down pretty
Yeah.
low to like realign the coffin bone. And when I think about that, at least in my case, the laminitic horses that I've worked on, what I find is that a lot of them can be, especially if they have high heels, can be quite tight through the back of the leg. And if you just take that heel off in the first trim, they can get really sore. They might not be able to get their heels all the way to the ground. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
very important soft tissue structure called the DDFT that runs down the back of the leg over the navicular bone and attaches underneath the coffin bone. And so now there's that much more leverage on that because it's already tight. And then you're leaving a long toe, which is increasing the leverage. So
Yep.
I'm kind of curious, like over time in these situations where the toe is left long like that and the heels are continuously brought low and the horse already potentially has a tight DDFT, what kind of damage is happening to the soft tissue and the navicular bone? Like what proportion of these horses go on to develop other pathologies, but because it's like a long-term thing, like it doesn't happen overnight, like
Yep.
what are these horses looking like 2 years out,
Mm-hmm.
from
Yep.
I just
that's what I think about.
the long toe, while adding extra leverage, is going to stop them from knuckling over.
I will say, yeah, that's so I've unfortunately social media sometimes brings out the worst in me. And so I got into arguments about this with people. And I've said, you can't just drop the heel on these horses because that's where you risk knuckling over. And this is where you get this like wind up cringe like pain where they're unable to like they
Wait.
just so
Like
painful they can't
cripple.
put their heel on the ground. I've seen, check ligament damage, DDFT damage with horses that have their heels lowered so quickly. And I've had people who trim this way talk or reply to me and say, well, if you leave their full toe and if you leave that, whatever, lamellar wedge, then they don't knuckle over. And like Kat saying, like, I do see how that's like physiology, like that would happen, but
I don't think
then
that's a
you're
good thing.
no,
needs to go somewhere
you're
else.
forcing so much pressure on that deep digital flexor tendon and the check ligaments. I just can't. It would be like if you wore high heels. Okay, it's not a great example because we're not starting with high heels. This is like the heels on these horses typically grow excessively quick because of the way the circulation of the hoof is occurring due to the rotation, et cetera, hyperinsulinemia. That could be a whole nother podcast episode too. But it'd be like if you wore high heels all the time and then somebody forced you to stop wearing them after years or even months of straight never having a break of high heels. And then not only do you have to take those high heels off, but they're then forcing you to stretch your heel to the ground instantly. Like
Like
No,
standing
no,
on
no,
a
now you have
stair.
to put your heel on
flippers
the
on
ground.
you too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the back of your leg is going to be so incredibly painful. And I know that there are people that are saying, well, these horses are comfortable. And I just don't know how. I mean, I don't, whatever. I feel like this
I
could
also
be,
Say whatever
struggle
you like.
because they don't show us videos of these horses moving.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
might get a video a long way away with them somewhere, but we don't get any actual videos of them up
No.
close that we can look
Someone
at.
leading them out, turning them in small circles, seeing if they can back up well. For me, if a horse long term isn't able to eat, drink, keep up with the herd, then like that's ethically not okay for me, and something else needs to be done. I can't see these horses being able to do that. And yes,
and
they
I
grow
will
out their
say,
laminar wedge, but I think it's because lamina are over-engineered and they're living on track systems. They're probably going to get better anyway.
mhm.
Are they
Are
getting
they,
better in spite of us
In
or because of us?
spite. Yes.
and that's something that, I actually think it was Daisy Bicking who told me that. Like, are these horses getting better? And it wasn't in relation to this conversation at all. It
Yeah.
was, we were talking about, this is, I don't know, 10 years ago.
Years ago.
She said, like, our horses getting better in spite of what we do or because of what we do. And that's really made me think a lot when I work on horses.
Yes.
But, the funny thing is that we're talking so much about these cases and are they comfortable, are they not? I want to reiterate, and I'm sure you guys see similar, is that we see horses get comfortable fairly quickly. Like I want to see a laminitic horse become comfortable enough to move around, even if it's in boots and pads, within one trim cycle.
Yeah.
Like I want them to be comfortable. And a lot of times I see them comfortable instantly once we do a setup trim and in boots and pads.
Yep.
They're comfortably moving around. And so I know that there's like argument about, well, is your approach making them comfortable or you're having, whatever, you're doing these extreme things. I don't think we're doing anything extreme, but I don't know if you guys see the same where like you want these horses to get, and if they're not comfortable, it's because the root cause is like
Yeah.
they're putting a horse back on grass and you're fighting a pasture when,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not that. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. We may need to make a part 2.
I know,
I was
yeah.
thinking that too.
I'm happy to keep going and we can have 2 episodes.
Yeah, I'm happy to
Oh,
do
that's
that.
a good idea.
Yeah. I
Bit
think
of
you
a
guys
bullet
made
head.
some really amazing points tonight. I think laminitis is a topic that we could talk on for days.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of hoof care providers and owners feel very passionately about it because a lot of people are affected by it. And it can be really devastating and very hard to navigate. So it was really nice to hear your perspectives. And I think it will help a lot of people.
Thanks for listening to today's Hoof to Horse podcast. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to check out the Hoof to Horse Academy, an online learning platform for horse enthusiasts and professionals. You can find us on all your favorite social media platforms. We look forward to you joining us for our next episode.